slightly after 1 o'clock. Got a pretty full agenda, so we'll get started. First of all, welcome to this joint committee of the Homelessness Committee of the Whole and the Public Safety Committee on the topic of homeless camps. Why don't we start the meeting by just going around the main table and introducing, see who's up here. Start with you, sir.
I'm Josh Duran, Park Superintendent.
Jesus loves me, excuse me. I'm not $1 billion Jesus.
I'm Bill Falsey, I'm the municipal attorney.
I'm Chief Tolley with the Police Department.
Tim Steele, Assembly.
Amy DeVosky, Assembly.
Patrick Flip.
Steve Train Assembly. Bobby Green Johnson.
Bill Evans.
Pete Peterson, Zone.
Ethan Berkowitz.
Nancy Burke.
Todd Sherwood, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
And walking in the room right now is the estimable Eric Croft. The purpose of this meeting is to address the homeless camps. What we're trying to do is to have all the sort of main entities that are involved in addressing the situation here in one room today to try to, first of all, let everybody know what is going on, what's the situation with the camps, what is the practice that we've been using to address the camps, and what are our plans going forward. This was prompted by a number of calls, contacts, and other communications that members of the Assembly, I'm sure members of the administration, have received this year about at least a sense that there is a growing problem with homeless camps. It's been a problem we've dealt with for a long time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think there was a death in one of the camps this morning. At least I saw a report on that. So it's something that continues to plague the city, and I think it's something that we have to be able to address in a comprehensive way that is effective. We've not only did we invited the law department, the police department, the health department, parks department. We've also invited the ACLU to be here because those of you who don't know, in 2010 the city was involved in a lawsuit over its trying to enforce taking down the camps. The ACLU was the main representative on the other side of that. So we've reached out to them to try to bring them into the conversation too. So whatever we do going forward, everybody's going to be on the same page and have a much better chance of being effective. So with that, I would like to begin by sort of explaining the situation as it stands and sort of the historical background. And for the first part of that, I'd like to turn to the city's homeless coordinator, Nancy Burke, to give us sort of an update on what she understands the status of camps to be. Nancy, all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The mayor's asked me to
It's all protocol here. Well, I want to begin by expressing appreciation for the attention that's coming to this issue, because it is something that is visible to everybody here in town. And if we want to have a community that's safe, not just for folks that are in the camps and the streets, but also for the community at large, it's something we can't ignore. And to that end, I want people to know that we've been actively housing individuals who have been homeless. We expect to have, over the past year, we expect to have 82 done by middle of next month. Our goal for the year is 100. There are some other successes that are part of that. The numbers for CSP are down, for sleep-out centers are down. We did a point-in-time count, and as a consequence of the point-in-time count, we have outreach teams in conjunction with the point-in-time count. Outreach teams are meeting every Tuesday with the CAP team, the police department, to discuss the camps and the folks that are in those camps. The goal is to make sure, as we work with those people there, that the services go out to them, and we help the people who are in those camps find housing or shelter that has appropriate services connected with them. And just the importance of this initiative can be measured by the experience of other jurisdictions. Utah, for example, using very similar techniques to the ones that we're deploying, reduced its homelessness by about 91%. They also had a community list, by name list, and they connected individuals to the appropriate social services They identified housing units, and this is something we're actively in the process of doing. So the current activities that are addressing this involve coordination between various municipal departments as well as some of the agencies that are nonprofit agencies, Parks and Rec, Police Department, Fire Department, Health and Human Services. And so we're working together to make sure there's an integrated system that follows through on what we're doing in the camp. Nancy will explain in greater detail what the nuances are, what the particulars are. We also want the assembly to be assured that the mayor's staff and my staff, I think that's a good personnel way, haven't gotten all Bob Dole yet. We're reaching out to the community councils and have actively engaged community councils, keeping them informed of what we're doing. The CAP team is going to continue to post the camps with the notices that indicate that we will dismantle those camps, and we're distinguishing between camps that are active and camps that are seemingly abandoned. And we're also going to make a concerted effort that those folks, as I said before, are connected to the social services and appropriate housing. We've identified resources to get Parks and Rec an additional 10 individuals to help clean up the camps, because that's part and parcel of making sure that public spaces are available for all members of the public in a way that's safe. So some of the more specific things that we have, and I want to thank the Assembly for its assistance in getting us the budget and the authorization to do this, is we're going to be incorporating the successful proposal where we have a work van that's sent around various parts of town, and it's going to arrange day labor for people who are homeless, or people who are panhandling. It's not always the identical population. Engaged in work effective work. It's been a program that's been deployed successfully in one place in Albuquerque most prominently. We're maximizing the existing housing units that are available at Sitka Place, which is formerly known as Merrill Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor Muldoon should be opening. We're looking at scattered site housing. There's 25 new units that are going to become open at the John Thomas building. Specific youth outreach has begun, particularly downtown, and I think probably one of the most notable things is we worked with Brother Francis and Beans to make sure that there's a more seamless operation there, so that there's adequate staffing, so that there's not a break between people leaving Brother Francis and before Beans opens up. And we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of the fact that so many people are congregated there to provide services, and also generate some daytime activities so people stay in that one place rather than spread through town and come back and forth. So that being said, Nancy, okay, Mr. Chair.
I think that's the overview of all the activities we're doing, and I think, for the purpose of the conversation, when people ask what's different, it feels in some ways that we're back at the place where we originally started with camp outreach and trying to figure out how to address camps in a way that met, the people's legal needs and the community's needs. But we've had a few years in between where we haven't really continued to work on how do we move people from camp and into housing, and then address the negative effects of camps in the community. And that feels like the piece of work that we're hitting now, and we'll be able to, I think over the summer, with the support of the CAP team and the service providers meeting, every Tuesday at 3, we're meeting and talking about the camps, talking about what are the needs, how do we connect specific people to the right resources. In the past, we've had the ability to make referrals, but they've just been generic ones. Hey, you could go to such and such place for housing. Now we're actually able to provide the people to glue the campers and the homeless folks to those services. So we'll be able to monitor them And that's the shift, that having a community list rather than individual agency wait lists. That shift will help us to be effective in what we're doing. So this summer, as we roll through, I think if we can continue to employ the resources that we have out and that will be coming online, thanks to some of the new funding that was approved, if we just continue to very methodically roll out these equal measures of carrot and stick is what communities who've made improvements in this area have done, and I think our plan will get us there.
Just want to note for the record, first of all, we've been joined by Assemblymember Dunbar, Assemblymember Welton, and Joshua Decker from the ACLU here as well. And Joshua, if you want to sit up at the table, that's fine too. Any questions for the mayor? Ms. Burke?
I apologize for being late. So perhaps this already has been addressed, but Mr. Mayor, you mentioned possibility of scattered site. And I was wondering if you or Nancy could speak a little bit more about where we're at with that, and at what point we going to get to site selection, that kind of thing.
The two models that are used in housing are models of service delivery that have people who live in one project, and so some of our more discussed projects, Carlick Manor, Sitka Place, those are what we refer to as single site properties. And then scattered site is a model that is used to lease units across the community, so the person can choose where that unit might be. And communities use both of those strategies, and the policy that we've been trying to pursue from the administration is that we really do need a mix of both. Some people actually would choose and prefer to live in a single site property together with people that they've been camping with and know for years. And others would choose to be just out in the community and working on just reintegrating and being a tenant someplace else. And so there are no projects at the moment that are scheduled for a single site development where we would need to have a property identified and moving forward on that. We're trying to pursue all of the avenues. We have a certain number of housing units that are available right now with some vacancies. So we're trying to pursue resources to make sure that we maximize the existing infrastructure we have, and then getting resources to people who would like to rent in the community.
Just a real quick follow-up. So I guess I maybe perhaps I misunderstood the term then. So it sounds like with scattered site, we don't do site selection. It's they go out and rent, like anyone would rent in a commercial property.
Yes.
Great. And have we been doing that already, or?
Yes, we'll have some. The state has been actually a partner on some vouchers for people with more intensive needs, and so those vouchers have been coming up periodically, and people they have choice, and they can go out and look for those units. And then there are the municipality has some funds that we're able to put into a tenant-based rental assistance program that are federal funds, and so we'll have probably 12 or 15 of those units coming online. So I think as we talk about housing, and as we get into the details of how do we get to stable housing for the people who are homeless right now, the rental voucher is oftentimes the pinch. That's what's hard to come up with. There's not enough resources at the state for rental subsidies, and so that's the challenge, is identifying rental subsidies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions for Mayor or Nancy on those issues? Seeing that, I just have one, and you mentioned, Nancy, that it's a combination of carrots and sticks, and I agree that is the proper approach. And maybe this is more appropriate for our upcoming speakers, the police department and the Department of Law, but can you highlight for us sort of the sticks that we're using? I understand the carrots and then getting people to the services, but there's also a component of this camp population that's not necessarily just down on their luck looking for a house, but engaging in criminal activity and the like. So if you could tell us a little bit about the sticks, that'd help.
Well, one of the reasons why we're noticing the camps, posting the notices, is we're going to take them down. That's a fairly large step.
and we'll have the chief here to talk and get into more details with that with the chief. But if there are no other questions, we'll turn it over to the Department of Law. Mr. Falsey is going to give us a brief sort of summary of what the legal issues and some of the restrictions that the municipality faces in addressing these issues.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I am Bill Falsey, the municipal attorney. I'm joined here today by Dean Gates, assistant municipal attorney, who played a heavy part in drafting our current ordinance and working through the litigation that I'm about to describe, and also by Todd Sherwood, who has been actively advising the CAP team from our office. And so the chair is correct. We intended to present for this group today a quick legal history of our homelessness camps ordinance. So this is a story that is all stick and no carrot. And we'll follow it through from its recent origin to the modern day and give you a sense of what the state of the law is now. So the story that I'm going to tell begins in 2009. The municipality has been abating homeless camps since at least the 1990s and probably before that as well. But it wasn't until 2009 that we actually attempted to codify a homeless camp abatement law. So in 2009, we defined illegal campsites as public nuisances and authorize their abatement, a legal term meaning that we can get rid of them, that we can clean them up. The first attempt actually was introduced that we would be able to take down a homeless camp after posting a notice for 24 hours. Before the assembly adopted the ordinance, they limited it to 12 hours. So it was a pretty aggressive stance. As the chair said, that prompted a lawsuit from the ACLU, who represented this man, Mr. Dale Engel, who was reported in the newspaper as saying that he had returned to his camp and found that all of his personal belongings, his sleeping bag, his tent, his military ribbons, they were all gone. And that began to focus the community's attention on this question about how to balance the different and sometimes conflicting interests. So Daily News at the time had this editorial, which I think actually framed it pretty well. Should the Anchorage police be able to shut down homeless camps? Yes. Should people living in the camps still retain their rights to their property, their due process of law? Yes. Are these positions irreconcilable? No. So the question is about where to find that balance, and that led us to the court for the court's assistance on where that balance should be. Before the lawsuit was actually resolved, the assembly went back and said maybe 12 hours was a little too aggressive and changed in midstream the ordinance to say we're going to give 5 full business days. So our litigation position was we're going to go in for 5 full business days. That did not resolve the lawsuit. ACLU's litigation position was that 15 days is the frequently used benchmark to grant a party to the time to abate a nuisance or to reclaim their unattended property. And ACLU prevailed in that lawsuit. The judge found that 5 days was just not enough time. Stepping into that opinion from Judge Ridner, the court found that the 5-day period is inadequate, but the court didn't tell us what the appropriate time frame was. So we knew 5 is too short, and we are back to the drawing board. And you'll see that the court was resolving the case much as the Anchorage Daily News was viewing the case. Cities do have a valid interest in keeping areas sanitary, orderly, and law-abiding, but in this instance, they were outweighed by the more immediate interests of the plaintiffs in not having their personal belongings destroyed after only 5 days' notice. The court took notice that other kinds of property become disposable in a municipality after longer time periods. So when disposable property enters into the police department in some settings, we hold on to it for 30 days. When we have found or safekeeping property, we hold on to it for 10 days. The court said, I don't understand why we're treating the property of homeless individuals in a different manner. That then sent the assembly once again back to the drawing board. There's actually an intervening third attempt at massaging this ordinance, but this is the 4th and final one. I believe at the time one assembly member said he felt like he was playing a game of whack-a-mole. This is where we finally landed. Interestingly enough, the post-lawsuit ordinance picked up the 15-day litigation position, although earlier in the development of the ordinance, the ACLU had written us a letter saying it's probably 10 days would be reasonable, but I think at this point there was no appetite in fighting about this anymore, so we said we know 15 days will work, let's go with 15 days. And so what are the procedures we have on the books now? They are not quite just the original proposal with the 15-day notice. We actually now have 3 options. And those 3 options are a 72-hour notice option, a 15-day notice option, and a notice to quit option. So on 72 days, 72 hours notice, the municipality can post an illegal campsite and remove it. But if it takes that shorter period, you have to store all the belongings that you have collected and allow someone to go back and reclaim them. There are exceptions for things which are biologically, like, hazardous or waste, that kind of thing. But by and large, most everything that you would collect, you'd have to store. The second option, and that process has been used. I don't know with what frequency it's being used today, but that process has been used. The second option is the 15-day notice option. That allows you to abate the homeless camp after a 15-day notice and dispose of everything you find as waste if it is not reclaimed within that window. The final option is to borrow from a concept from landlord-tenant law and to say that the municipality can post a notice to quit and sort of begin a forcible entry and detainer process. I am not aware if this process has ever been used, but I don't know that it would gain you much that you aren't getting under the other two options. You would still have to store the property, and you would still have to comply with some notice provisions. I think the FED provisions have a 2-day notice with a 2-day extender, but in any event, I'm not sure this has ever been followed up on. I'm happy to take questions, but that's the current state of play.
Any questions for Mr. Paulson?
Bill, when it's stored, the 72-hour thing is used, how long do you store the stuff for?
Let me see if I have that in front of me here. I believe it is 30 days. 30 days here in the storage of personal property.
And is the space that AP is using, is it sufficient?
I'll have to defer to the chief on that.
So I'm being told that we do not use the 72-hour method because of the storage issue. We don't have active space. The building.
Any other questions from Mr. Falsey on that issue? Seeing none, let's move along to the nice lead-in we have for the chief. And Chief, if you can explain to us sort of what is the process that's being used, what police resources are being directed toward this, and how it's working from your opinion.
So I will say that we have been out abating camps already this year, and we know what was done last year in comparison to this year. We have had an increase of activity in that aspect. We also believe that this is actually the reason we're seeing homeless folks walking about in town and so on, in other areas that aren't hidden by the foliage and so on. So that's why you may see more activity in the community. I brought with me Deputy Chief of Operations Gillum, as well as our Division Captain Bill Miller of the Crime Suppression, and then our Acting Lieutenant Josh Moeller. And be more than happy to answer any type of specific questions on what actually we're seeing this year and what's doing. If there's interest in it, it's probably the best way to proceed if you have actual questions. Do the best way to answer them.
Does anyone have any questions for the police department on the, Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How far do they have to move the camp? Because I see camps fairly regularly over in the old Vassar Greenhouse property or new Muldoon Park. And sometimes they're gone for just a day or two, and then you see them 100 yards or so from where they used to be.
So you're right, many of these areas, is it one camp or is it multiple camps in a given area? And I'll ask Acting Lieutenant Mulder to explain what he was seeing and how that actually occurs and how we determine a boundary.
Sure. We currently use the geographic location that we find them in. So in the case of Far North Bicentennial Park, we could have a tent camper in that huge amount of acreage that we abate. We only find out later from a complaint from a citizen that they've moved a mile within the park. We don't treat that as they've been in the same location and never really moved, because quite frankly they did move to a different location, and in some other parks they could literally move much smaller distance and be in a completely different geographical area. So we have to use somewhat of a measure of subjectivity. Our ultimate goal is to reach the campers and tell them what they're doing is not permitted and get them in contact with the resources throughout the municipality so that we can ultimately move them out of the camps altogether. That's our goal in the whole thing.
Thank you.
Mr. Muskie?
Thanks. Have you had any issues with campers being on private property? And if so, what has been the result?
The private property is an immediate issue. The owner of the property has the ability to call the Anchorage Police Department and says someone is trespassing, and that's an immediate. They don't have the camper does not have the right to camp on private property.
So there's no notice, it's just get your crap off and go? Okay.
Mrs. Weddleton and Mr. Steve.
So, who cleans up the mess? There's a big mess there, and is there any, do you dump take everything to the dump, or do you have some discretion? Because the company's probably very personal.
So again, that's a joint effort with the.
So once the CAP team goes in and abates a campsite in a public area, after that point, we have two requirements. One is we have to send to DHHS what's called a HEART form, which connects the campers with Department of Health and Human Services to get them resources. We also then have to send out an email with information as to the location to Community Work Service. And then once the abatement period is passed, Community Work Service goes in and cleans up the abandoned tent site.
And everything is taken at the dump?
So typically after the 15 days, what you're gonna find is just trash, but if by some chance, based on the ordinance, if by some chance something of clear personal value is discovered, they're then supposed to contact us and we're supposed to take care of it. To this date, that's a very rare occurrence.
Mr. Steele and Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, my point with regards to the private property, are you still discretionary in terms of what you keep for a while and what you don't? Or if it's there, it's part of the trespass and it goes away?
If the camp is occupied, then the person is given a warning, to take their property and leave. If they leave something, if it's part of what's listed in the ordinance, if it's a value, then we will take it for health and safety.
Okay, it's occupied, but they're not there. I mean, you can tell they're rented, like,
Yeah.
in some cases.
The property would be stored for safety.
Are the campsites identified? I was told that there was a rough survey done of campsites to identify where. Is that?
So that's what I think was alluded to earlier by the mayor and by Ms. Burke, that they did go out and do the survey, they went and visited some of the various camps to get a total management. Now, we, as a police department, keep our own information records for just those that we consider as camps offenders.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, is there any cross-referencing the data between camp locations and criminal activity to look for particular hotspots?
The campers, that there have common locations. You'll find them near Ship Creek area, you'll find them in the Chester Creek area, Valley of the Moon area. There's even as far south as the Diamond along the railroad tracks. So it's a problem that affects citywide, but there are higher concentrations. You mentioned earlier in 2010, when the lawsuit, when we first posted the camps in 2011, we were looking at several hundred camps in this area. I think it was estimated between 200 and 400 camps that we're dealing with. As the years have gone down and are moved forward, the CAP team, you heard them say the process is they go to the camps, they're asking individuals if they need medical attention. They ask them if they're willing to work with social services. And from 2011 through 2014, you will notice, if anybody's here from Brother Francis, that those shelters started going through at over capacity through the summer, year-round, which before the summertime would come and their capacity would go down. And what that was telling us, the indication was that people that were camping are now in the shelters, which is what we want. It's safer there. You mentioned earlier that there was deaths in these camps. Yes, we've had homicides in these camps. It's very dangerous, and especially for the vulnerable population. So what we're trying to do is reduce the numbers of camp. What we have now is there is a greater percentage of the people that are resisting in these efforts. And where we may have seen some of the larger established camps, like the self-photograph Mr. Policy told you earlier, what we're we're finding now is there's this flopping, there'll be a smaller camp for a short temporal time, and then they're moving from location to location. So what you might think is 60 or 70 camps really might only be a half a dozen people. They're just moving in a general area. So it's a moving target. We're trying to do it, but we're getting to the point now where I heard it said earlier, and it's important, Mr. Evans mentioned that the carrot and the stick problem. You're now forced to visit the stick. And what are we going to do to deal with this problem section that resists any assistance?
Appreciate the information, but I'm not sure I heard the answer to my question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is there a cross-referencing of the data between camp locations and criminal activity?
Yes, we use, Bear Analytics will tell you, if you know how to use Bear, you can go in and you can pull up the crime statistics. Now, can I say that people in the camps are committing these crimes? No, but we can tell you that there are, a lot of what's in these camps is stolen property, the tarps and things like this. So we know that there is some crime that's associated with it, but I can't tell you who's doing what.
I'm aware that it's not the campers causing the crime, maybe sometimes, maybe not. I'm just looking for how we can target specific locations that may have higher levels of criminal activity. Thank you.
Any other questions for the chief? Mr. Lasky?
Thank you. Chief, you had referenced in 2011 there was an estimate of 200 to 400 camps. What is your estimate today?
Our best information is that we're probably chasing, 5 or 6 dozen individuals. So I think it's less than 100 people, so maybe 75 or so. And it's only anecdotal because, when I talk to the CAP team or when I talk to the people that are dealing with it, they're now seeing the same people over and over again.
Okay, so that 200 to 400 camps was actually 200 to 400 estimated people in 2011?
No, it was actually probably more people because that was the camps that we were talking about, the reported camps, and some of these are occupied by more than one person.
Any other questions? Mr. Steele?
I know down in Chester Creek area, that it's kind of a string of activity. Yes, there may be camping down on the green belt, but there's also drinking and drug activity on the steps up to the elementary school, and neighbors about noise and stuff. So I suspect that is one area that is defined as criminal activity. And hopefully, I have a community council meeting at North Star tonight, as a matter of fact. And I'm sure I'll be asked about what's going on.
That is one of the recurring locations. The camps will be posted, they will be abated, and either they move to another part of the camp or someone else will move in.
But it is the intention of the police department to work with the community. When we do see the homeless population out on the streets, it's actually a credit to the community in that they acknowledge that and that there is a tolerance for that. With that being said, when it becomes a violation of law and we're unable to help them through social assistance or nonprofit organizations, things like that, then the police department is prepared to take appropriate enforcement action.
Visibility is a big issue, I think, in terms of the neighborhood, to know that folks are out doing something. I know the principal of North Star was really concerned about drug activity in the wintertime at the entrance to the school where they have shelter themselves. And so I suspect that is, actually I'll ask them how that's doing. The summertime is just a little bit.
If I would ask that if you would have them call us as soon as they see that behavior.
Okay.
And then we can load the call.
Yeah.
For the rest of those that are here, calls for service is extremely important to us because we are data driven. We do crime analysis, and if we're seeing hot spots based on the calls for service, then we can direct our resources to it. So it's important. Thanks.
Got the mayor, then Mr. Dunbar, then Mr. Bosky, and then Mr. Crane.
I was just gonna point out that the CAP team is expanding.
Yes, we just added 4 new members to it.
with Chief, and it sounds like you have successfully abated a large number of camps in the last several years. Are there any parts of Anchorage that you've seen increased activity? And I just ask because Northeast Community Council, particularly in our area, Community have been reporting a lot of camps, and it's not clear to me, and perhaps you guys have the data, whether that is just we're starting to notice them more, or if people have been sort of pushed out of the city center and now are sort of migrated to East Anchorage. Is that something you've encountered at all?
The answer is yes. There is displacement to a certain degree. The numbers are kind of fuzzy, we're not sure, because one or two people could be responsible for multiple camps. So it's a little hard to track that. A lot of our public, when they do call into camps, when the officers get there, it's been abandoned. It looks like it's been there for quite some time. So to associate a particular camp to a particular person, the only time we can do that for certainty is when the officers go and the camp is actually occupied. So, and again, to our best understanding, we're only really dealing with about maybe 75 individuals, and they're creating the largest number of camps now, as opposed to 2011.
Comment relate to that?
Yes, I think that's the topic of conversation going now with Parks and Rec, APD, AFD, and the homeless services around unifying how the calls come in, making that clear for the public, publishing an FAQ on the process and the needed timelines and how everything works, and even cleaning up maybe a way for that information to come in through a portal or the website is some of the work that we're looking into right now.
Ms. Dombrowski and Mr. Training and Mr. Gates.
Thank you. Well, first, on one of my questions, but the other one, of the about 75 people that we're talking about, are you noticing a trend in demographics? Do you notice a trend, like some of them, maybe there's mental illness that is a big component. Maybe it's drug addiction. Maybe it's people who just want to be autonomous and just want to kind of get away. Are you noticing a specific group? Maybe if it's mental illness, maybe we need to pull in more DHSS to have more intensive contact.
Let me ask Acting Lieutenant Dover that, because he has actually better contact on a daily basis.
So, yes, it runs the gamut. One of the hard form is the form that we use to contact the campers if they are indeed actually at the tent site over there. We do ask questions about history of drug usage, alcohol usage, veterans. We're basically trying to get them in contact with the correct outreach community members. Then myself and some other people around the city that represent different organizations meet every Tuesday with Ms. Berg, and we discuss those individual people that we come in contact with and about trying to get them in touch with the correct community resources based upon if they have mental illness, or they have drug dependency, or they have alcohol dependency, or they're a veteran. It runs the gamut. What we see in the camps is a complete slice of our population.
I apologize for waiting so long to ask the question, but in the back, can you hear what's going on? Can you hear the comments? Okay, we've got a pretty full room, so if everybody can try to speak up a little bit easier for those in the back. Mr. Train?
Chief, before we had the budget, we cut back on my police officers. We'd have a police officer show up at every community council meeting. I make 9 to 10 a month. I don't see police officers there. So would you try and get back out to community council meetings? And I would be very happy to have you guys speak first to community council before anybody else. I know your time is limited, but we need to hear from the community council, because that's our best avenue to what's happening out in the world.
We'll make an effort on that.
Thank you, sir.
Ms. Gray Jackson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lately, Mr. Train and I have been getting quite a few emails from our constituents directly in the Midtown area telling us about camp. So I just want to confirm that the CAP team is aware of all the camps in our community.
Those that are brought to our attention, yes. So,
Okay.
for example, we've been told about 298 camps so far this year, between the period of January 1 and May 10th.
So if I can follow this here. So when we get an email from a constituent talking about a camp, is it okay if I just send an email to you or the camp or
then it's, the citizen calls our non-emergency number for dispatch, because then currently it's routed so that we can pull that information on a weekly basis and go to every single camp that's been reported by the citizens of Anchorage within a month.
Right.
That's our goal. We're working on some sort of a portal that we can use that not just will they be reported to the Anchorage Police Department, but they'll be reported to this one specific location where not only can the APD go to, but Anchorage Fire, Parks and Rec, everybody can go to, and our citizens can get answers to questions that they might not already know, and right there at that one portal.
Right, and that's a reasonable approach, and just so you know, I haven't sent any emails to you. So thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to add one thing that would really tremendously help us is better descriptions. With modern technology, it's very easy to access GPS locations, GPS coordinates on your phone. You wouldn't believe how difficult it is to find the blue tent in the middle of far north Bicentennial Park at the footpath, 850 yards left of the tree. It gets difficult. So this portal, if we can get it going, will seek to get that information, to elicit that information from our citizens so we can better address the problem.
Any questions from the police? I have a couple, just so I'm clear, and I know we're not using the 72-hour notice because of storage issues. Is it my understanding then that we're using the full 15-day notice abatement period? And that's 15 business days, correct?
15 days.
15 days, calendar days. Do you find that I guess my question is, would it be more effective to use the 72 hours if there was storage available?
My personal opinion is that a 72-hour would be unbearable from a purely logistics sense, both for community work service to clean up the camps, for us to be able to go back out in 72 hours and make sure that they're gone, and then the huge amount of property that we would have to store, and then the resources that you would have to put to maintain that property on this rotating 30-day schedule, it would become such a colossus that we would probably be very quickly reevaluating the 72-hour. I will say that most people do empty the camps far sooner than the 15 days. They have 15 days. If we get another report that campsite is still active, we come back in 16 days, it's been, we can tell that it's been abandoned for quite some time. And we will see those people in other campsites that will pop up in between the 15 days reported by citizens.
And just as a brief follow-up, if a police officer, member captain, comes across a camp that's actively popular, there's people in the camp sitting there doing what they're doing in camp, is my understanding then that all you can do is tell them that in 15 days they have to be gone?
No.
It's only an abandoned, the abatement period seems to do a property, but if somebody's in the camp themselves, going to be told to leave.
So this is an issue of discussion. So maybe it would be better to have you legal answer this. Mr. Sherwood, we've discussed it recently, but my personal feeling is if you tell somebody there that you have 15 days to exit this campsite, but we want you have 15 days for your property to be cleared from the campsite, but you yourself have to leave now, I would ask, aren't we just inviting them to come back and violate that trespass that we just told them to immediately leave to get their property? And then, if we're, say, maybe, so you would like to answer this, but let's say they come back and their property's gone on the 16th day, but they haven't been back since the initial time they were told to leave, wouldn't then the question become, they never had an opportunity to actually regather their property?
Other than when they initially left.
And you've seen some of these camps, there's an awful lot of property there. So we feel it's better to to err on the side of caution, and that is give them the 15 days to clearly vacate out, and then come back after that 15 days if there's another report of that camp being active. And anything then discovered still present is considered trash.
Mr. Welton, you have a question?
Where does ARPA fit in on the plan?
Typically, ARPA deals with the trash that's left by those that are drinking. They go around and pick up the empty bottles and things like that. But they do volunteer occasionally to walk in the parks. In the past, they used to work with the Parks and Rec community work service group. They would call and say, we will be in such and such a park, we can help you pick those up.
Actually, Ed O'Neill passed down Arbor to me, and I took over Arbor, and I actually got in a bad car accident, and took me out for a couple of weeks. but we're starting to get back into the groove of things and hopefully getting back and start cleaning up camps. But we work with the homeless hand in hand, and yeah, we're like ground troops. We work at the community work service, and we pick up the workers and all that. It's kind of what we do, and cleaning up is our deal.
Yeah, hopefully people have contact information so that, so you're able to get a hold of
Just, in talking about the problems with stores, I seem to recall or read somewhere that there was at one time, maybe it was during the last effort to clean up the camps, a storage facility at Porcupine or something like that. Does that ring a bell? Is it something we had or still have, or do you know what the status of that is?
Mr. Chair, we tried to look at the 72-hour notice, and for all the reasons that Lieutenant Golder mentioned, Porcupine was part of that plan about where we were going to store that, but just due to the quantity of stuff that was left in the camps, the ability to move it through the system, have enough personnel to bring it into the facility, have enough personnel to get rid of it once that 30 days is up and stuff like that, that was all discarded. And so that was part of that plan.
And I worked with the police department a little bit at that time, and went to the Porcupine Street place in, it was about 5 years ago. And as I recall, I think it was the state building we were going to lease, or we got, but the building itself was gonna need a fair amount of bringing up to date. I think there was a mildew problem there.
There was a problem, and there was a mildew problem.
So it became a real money issue, as I recall. Plus, it looks big when you're in there and it's empty, but I think everybody knew it was just gonna fill up really quick.
Ms. Burke?
Would you like, there's an update on that facility, it's not really when it's housing a nonprofit that's working with the homeless to receive training for employment and moving out of homelessness, so it's working on a separate part of the issue.
Any other questions or comments for the police? Mr. Miller?
I'll just have one, and this is going off of a long time memory. If you know, maybe you can comment on it. I remember one of the issues too with sort of a lot of the stuff. There was a lot of discussion about biohazard and I don't know if it was bed bugs or whatever. So they were talking about a lot of this stuff is actually contaminated to some degree.
Correct. A lot of it's contaminated with different types of waste. Most of it is wet, and so then if you plastic bag it, you run into a mold issue. So we'd have to have a pretty big room to dry everything out, and then you'd have to come back and repackage it individually. And then we'd have to be able to figure out a way to identify who actually belongs to the property. If you have 3 people that come in and claim the same $200 sleeping bag from REI, how do we determine who gets the bag, who has legal claim to the bag, and who doesn't? And so just the issues kept piling up, and it was really becoming very fast and practical to do that.
If I could add to that, under the code, like the terms you use, it's contaminated, biological hazardous, it says you can summarily dispose of it, but it becomes a big judgment call, when it's bad enough. And again, from that standpoint, playing on the side of caution, as Lieutenant Holder said, it's better to do 15-day notice, and then they can make that decision out there. Then when you go back, you know that everything can be taken.
Along those same lines, the 15-day notice appears to me to be just something that the Assembly landed on at the end of the whack-a-mole game, but is not necessarily constitutionally mandated that there be 15 days. It's 15 Mr. Decker here to keep me in line if I go constitutionally astray. But is there a lesser period of notice that can be provided and still maintain the same system where you don't have to preserve the property? I guess that's illegal. I'm looking at you, Bill.
So the 100% correct legal answer is we don't know. We suspect that you probably could get away with 10 days. I don't know if that would draw an objection, and I don't know how a court would deal with that. We know 5 was too little, and we settled on 15, and no one has challenged 15.
One second. I'm looking at Mr. or Judge Ridner's opinion. Was his decision about the 5 days, because at that time we were doing 5 days and getting rid of it all at the same time, correct? So 5 days and completely getting rid of the property would be bad, like you said. Some point between that and 15 days, it's questionable, correct? Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I'm hoping that we're putting the first things first, and that is in terms of, one is cleaning up the camps and getting rid of material and so on and so forth. But the other is the housing, the jobs, the other services. And I don't know what percentage of that population is really looking for it or not, and I know we talked about it at the beginning. But I'm hoping that the services plays a big part. And I know that there's some folks that are gonna live that way no matter what. But if you take their goods, if you take their stuff, you've got responsibility for it. And it's a liability for it, I presume too, so. Sticky wicket, it was easier to solve for one time.
I believe Mr. Trainee has a question for the ACLU.
Mr. Decker, 5, 10, or 15, what keeps us out of court? Is reasonable for the city.
You should look at his presentation first.
He's already worked this out in his head.
Through the chair, thank you very much for the question, Senator Training. I think as Senator Steele mentioned, the best focus is to figure out how to solve the problems as opposed to playing whack-a-mole with abating the Camp A and then having to look at Camp B and then abating that. As the municipal attorney stated, 15 days has been the law for a few years, and that has not drawn a constitutional challenge from us. If the Assembly is considering a lower standard, we're certainly happy to take a look at that and let the Assembly know our opinion on it.
I would be interested in the 10-day limit.
We're
Would you look at that for me?
happy to do so.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Ms. Ingvarsky?
I think I'm missing something, because I thought previously when this was debated, the ACLU did come back with a letter saying 10 days would be satisfactory to them. Isn't that what you showed at the beginning of your presentation?
Through the chair, I feel a little bad for Mr. Decker on this because this was not during his tenure, but yes, there was a letter that we got from Jeffrey Mittman, who
Was the
said it
director at that time?
would be not unreasonable to say 10 full business days, which may not be wholly different from 2 business days, but essentially 15 days.
But yeah, if Mr. Decker, if you could kind of look in with the organization and see if there'd be objections to 10 calendar days, we'd appreciate it.
Happy to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
I have a question for Mr. Decker. So perhaps I'm misunderstanding the way you operates though. So supposing we did go to 10 days and then a client came to you, a person from this community came to you, don't they sort of drive the process of whether or not we get litigated or not, rather than the organization going out seeking someone? If a homeless individual who had had their possessions destroyed after 10 days came to you, how do I say it? You see what I'm getting at here? It's not them that's suing us, it's the client. It's true.
I through the chair and Dunbar, you're certainly right in terms of the questions of legal standing, that yes, there needs to be a client to germinate the lawsuit. Our philosophy at the ACLU is we are members of the community. If there's a way that we can work collaboratively on the front end to air our concerns, and if the Assembly shares them and come up collaboratively with the process that we think meets constitutional muster, we think that that's good. If we're not able to come to a meeting of the minds, then we would have to consider what we think is best at that point in time.
And that's precisely why we invited Mr. Decker to be here. We wanted to have a upfront conversation, avoid any problems, and get them involved in helping to solve the solution, and has been more than willing to serve in that role. Grateful for that, Mr. Paulson.
And I did want to just make sure that we were leaving some clarity on what this 15-day discussion is really about. There's a distinction between illegally camping in the parks, which you're not allowed to do, and which you could be dismissed from the park, or trespassed from the park, cited from the park, and destroying your stuff that allows you to camp in the park. So if I showed up to a park and was dismissed and told to go away, the question is, at what point can the municipality destroy my sleeping bag and take my tent? And the answer is at no point if I say that's mine, I do get to walk away with it. It's only what amount of time do you have to put a notice on this sleeping bag that says, if no one claims this, eventually we're going to throw it in the garbage. And the question has been 5, 10, 15 days.
I just want to go back for a second, because I think this might really be a moot point, frankly, because APD had already commented that they put the notice up there, but most people vacate far before the 15 days. I understood that correctly. So do you typically see, on average, you typically see they're gone within 5 days or a week, or is it usually, 3 days before?
Well, my team doesn't only deal with abating a homeless camp. So our process is all the camp reports that have come in since the previous week, so we were off. We do those reported camps that week. We'll generally devote a day to doing homeless camp statements every week. So what we typically see that lends me to believe that they leave prior to the 15 is if we have complaints of a new campsite, say 7 days after we did the last set of camps, and now we're seeing the same person that was in that previous camp, now in a different camp location. That's the assumption that we're making, that they obviously vacated the campsite prior to 15 days. We would almost have to basically devote all of our time every day to watching every camper to try to determine when it is, how often they're moving, and where they're going.
Sure. And I think with that comment, honestly, my perspective is it's probably more valuable for us to deal with, are we making sure people who have mental health care issues or drug addiction issues or whatever issues they have, are we making sure, how do we successfully incorporate them into getting the services they need versus quibbling over 5 days? I think personally that's a big time.
Comments or questions? Okay, seeing none, that leads us to the next issue on our program, which may be shorter than anticipated, because I think we've gone through most of the issues involved in this topic already. But it's supposed to be just a general discussion, and I think the way to leave that at this point is just to see, given everything that we've heard, everything that the municipality is doing on both the carrot and the stick issue, everything that the police department, particularly the CAP team, are doing to abate the problem, are there other things that can or should be done, especially things that the assembly can be of value in allocating resources to or creating ordinances for, that would help in curbing this problem, bringing down the number of camps, maybe someday eliminating them off camps entirely. Is there, we'll just open the floor up to any suggestions in that regard or any needs.
I just have a comment, and I am very pleased that the new administration has stepped into this a little deep. It's long been an issue. If it was easy, we would have solved it a long time ago. But I think the resources have been identified, or the players have been identified, and we're working towards some real solutions on it. Are we going to solve the problem? No, it's going to be a problem. But I'm glad to see the breadth of the approach. I think that hats off to the administration.
Any other comments or ideas?
I have one comment. I would just say, from an assembly standpoint, I don't know that we need more laws necessarily. But I think when we hear them talk about, there's all these different groups, especially when they talk about the veterans group. I know recently, in the last 2 years, there's been somebody who was interested in creating like a vet village where they had veterans housing. So a lot of times you'll see veterans that like to get together. I think from a legislative perspective, when we see projects like that, those are things we should encourage. I think it makes sense. But from an assembly perspective, I think one of the best things we can do, and we talked about this at the town hall in Eagle River, is sometimes we are not encouraging people enough to report things because the APD can't respond. They can't they can't, the data's not there if the data's never reported. So I think at all of our community council meetings, we have to keep reminding people, if you see something, you have to say something. Call APD's non-emergent line and make sure everybody knows what it is, 786-8900, right? Yeah. So you have.
About the we were saying together.
Yeah, so, but I think for us to constantly remind people, because a lot of people don't wanna call the police department because they don't think it's emergency enough. And so they don't wanna be a burden. They don't, you know, you pick up the phone, you know, the dispatchers are busy. So I think just a constant reminder to people. I mean, if you see somebody that you think, okay, this is a homeless camp, call this number. And I think that education, because most people don't know. I mean, I gotta tell you, I mean, anytime I see something, I just forward the email to Chief Gillum.
I'll do that.
That's where it goes.
Any other comments? Mr. Pearson, then Mr. Number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we know there was, and probably still is, a problem with splash use among some of the homeless people. Have we seen a connection or an uptick of homeless people that are addicted to heroin? I know the amount of heroin use in the state has been reported to be increasing rapidly, and I'm just wondering if it's in the homeless camps as well.
No more than the rest of the population. It's not unique to the homeless population.
All right, thanks.
Mr. Number.
So again, I apologize for being late, so I might have missed the introduction. Is there someone here from Community Work Service? Okay. So I had the opportunity with some.
Josh Vernon is here from Parks and Rec.
Oh, great. And this is also a question for the administration, more broadly the mayor's office. So I had the opportunity with some volunteers a couple weekends ago to go and clean up some abandoned camps, and I was just astounded by how much material it is. It's just it's so much stuff. It's almost unbelievable. And it seems to me that might be, from what I'm hearing from the APD as well, that might be more of a choke point perhaps, that we have the resources to go out and tell people you can't be here and they leave. Then we have these large empty camps that seem to remain for a long time, and they are, and then our constituents stumble upon them in the park. And so I guess my question is sort of, within that 15 days, is Community Work Service actually getting to these camps within 15 days? Do you need more resources? How many people do you have currently devoted to this task?
So currently there's about approximately 3 to 4 times staff at Community Work Service that are devoted to it. They also work with all the people that are performing the Community Work Service. In addition to that, in some cases, park maintenance does have to help because there is such a significant amount of trash. But the mayor's office has recently allocated an additional 10 people and vehicles associated with that, and that's what we feel is an appropriate amount to deal with the problem we have at hand.
Do you have statistics on generally how many days it takes between when you get the report and when it's actually cleaned up?
It's a daily activity, the cleanups, and the strategy varies from time to time based on the location. So we do take kind of sometimes a triage approach to it, and sometimes we're focusing on specific areas because they're easily accessible. It's in an area where we're already working, and then sometimes ones like maybe in the middle of Far North Bicentennial Park will get put lower down on the list just because of how the logistics associated with getting there. So it varies.
So you wouldn't say that generally, the moment we hit that 15 days, it gets cleaned up. That's relatively uncommon?
It is, yes.
Seeing no other questions, it's time we could open this up to our vast audience that's here. And I see Mr. Constant has a question.
So last week, about 8-10 members of 5 community councils, Rogers Park and North Star, Fairview, Airport Heights, and South Addition, met to have a preliminary discussion on the topic of what's to be done. And we came up essentially with 7 points, and we were able to speak with the mayor's team on the matter, separate conversations, and several of them have already been started since our conversation last week. But the things that the communities are asking for at this point are a really clearly defined process from our phone call to abatement of a camp, so that I can know something's been done. Because there's a perception that nothing is actually happening. When you make a call, everyone's burdened, then there's no cleanup. And so I don't believe that perception. I would predicate the conversation to say that the carrot, I think, is working. The community is commenting a lot that there are a reduction of problems, and so I do want to give credit to the mayor's team. It is working. So, and I think we need more of the carrot. Number 2 is posting of signage along the Chester Creek Trail at certain intervals, not to overwhelm the visual field, but that say no camping and no, these various behaviors, because it isn't marked anywhere on the trail system. Number 3, I just heard about it, Mr. Dunbar speaking about clearing of vacant camps, the ones that we know they're not in at this time, so that when it's time to hop to the next one, there are less options. It's something that we have really come around. One additional one is a police presence on the trail system. That our trail system is considered part of our transportation system, but it's a part of our transportation system that has no law enforcement on it. And so the idea of perhaps setting up a deal where you have once a month, every duty officer has to, with a partner, walk down the trail system just to be present. Some kind of a creative method to actually bring the force out there, but not create additional tons of cost. The next item on the list is, and I'm almost done, when they implement the wayfinding system on the park system that's underway right now, that they actually create a system of designations of location so that when I call 911 for public safety emergency, I can't just say, I'm 150 feet west of the line over here, and you get the person saying, I don't know where that is. So come up with a system that matches the wayfinding to the public safety, so when I call 911, you can find me. I can say I'm at marker number 75, something along those lines. Finally, that group is going to meet with the mayor's team next week on the 17th to kind of bring forward these concerns in more detail. We would like a report back to the community of the plans of the administration of the assembly that says these are the things we'd like to do, sometime within a reasonable time frame so we can work. And then the last item is, in the winter, we would like another summit, a really well-planned summit that brings together the community councils of impact and asks the question, how are we going to tackle this for next summer, so that we can get volunteer effort to apply to the question, because people want to help, they just don't have a way to help. Thank you.
So there are 38 councils in Anchorage, and we ask you to also include the 39th, which is the federation of all the city councils. It's really helpful, and that is our goal in the department, to try to deal with that one group that represents all the councils. We've also taken steps within the police department to create within the crime suppression a way of dealing in a more responsive way with all these groups. There are some mile markers along the coastal trails, and those mile markers are helpful, but maybe it might take something to look at to break them down into tenths of miles or something that's a little more user-friendly.
The Chester Creek Trail is not the coastal trail, and there's been a lot of input about the trail watch system, but that really just works on the coastal trail. It doesn't really run all the way up. And so the Chester Creek Trail is an area of special interest.
Yes, you're correct there. In the past, we have, and we do have plans mobilizing our SROs this summer, again under Captain Miller's guidance, and hopefully this will be one of the areas that we will have them on bicycles and show more of a presence on those trails. But we all have to remember that calls come in priorities. If a person's life is at risk or serious injury, those are going to take priority over the life-threatening situations and so on. And we don't have unlimited resources as much as we would like to be able to respond immediately to each and every single one of these incidents. It's impractical. And that's why it is also equally important. I'm really pleased with the relationship the police department shares with the communities. Because many communities, citizens are unwilling to contact the police because they don't think things will be done. We're telling them to contact us. Let us get it on record. We do have a police scientific look at all of these calls and so on. We do look at what days of the week, what time of the day, and that helps us direct our resources so we can better address those concerns. Thank you for sharing this.
I'm going to go to the woman in the back who's been patiently had her hand up in blue.
Thank you. I realize that some of these people can be helped and they're down on their luck.
but I honestly feel that a lot of them, it's a life choice, they wanna be out of the streets. Is it illegal for the city to set up designated campsites for them to go so you know where they all are, and put in toilet and shower facilities so that at least they can get clean? Is it illegal?
There's enough lawyers in the room.
Joe, you wanna take this one?
You know, depending on the amount of people that need to be taken care of, you might have to have one downtown and one south or something, but at least it would be monitored and they would be able to get cleaned up.
I think Mr. Flynn has a response to this.
It's not illegal. I'll tell you why. I was once in a forum, a candidate forum, with about this many people in the room. And one of the candidates brought up the suggestion that we establish homeless camps, official homeless camps in the community. I said, well, we've had that discussion before. By a show of hands, who would like to have that camp in their neighborhood?
Should be downtown.
See? Not a single hand.
Well, what's wrong with the property on Third Avenue where the old hospital was years ago?
Sizing would be unstable, and there's already a whole bunch of services down there, and I can assure you, if you talk to the Fairview Community Council, they feel they've done more than their fair share already.
1 second, Ron. Mr. Trainee had a comment on that as well.
And Seattle tried that, and now it's called the jungle in Seattle. It runs under I-5. They're about to block it off and shut it down. They had numerous problems with sanitation, with crime. It's so bad the fire officer is not even allowed to go down there. If a fire's reported, unless you take the police officer, he jacks with it. It just hasn't worked.
Okay.
Mr. Dombrowski also?
Thank you. I'm gonna shift a little bit because I think security liability might be an issue if the city was to establish that. But going back onto what Chris was talking about a little bit, one of the comments that I can anticipate will come is, well, how do I know if it's already been called in, right? So what I'm thinking though is rates online. I mean, there's probably a lot of ways that you could put another feature on there where if somebody wants to just pick homeless camps or homeless whatever, they could probably look and see a map that it's been called in. I'm sure that's a function that could be worked with.
I'd have to go back and look, but I would be surprised if it's not already there.
I don't have it as a setting on my phone. I have like major friends.
So there are actually two areas where you can differentiate between the different types of calls and crimes on the left and set those filters. So I will go back and look, and if it's not, then I'll talk to them about adding that as a call for service. But if it's a call for service, I'll go back and look.
It's just an interesting feature, Chris, because then you'll be able to see, if you come across a new one, you should be able to see geographically by a map, okay, these 3 new ones have popped up in the last 30 days in my community council. So for community councils, that might be a good feature.
Mr. Hess, Mr. Dunbar, Mr. Lieberman, you, and Mr. Lindenbeck. So Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the pleasure of speaking with constituents multiple times a week who want to file complaints against the Anchorage Police Department, Parks and Recreation, the mayor's office. Why aren't they enforcing the law? Why aren't they enforcing the code? And, you know, Ms. Burke talked about frequently asked questions. I think one of the best things we could do, the mayor's office, the assembly, the municipality, is to post something online that doesn't talk about just what we're doing, but the limits on what can be done. We don't have loitering laws in Anchorage, so I have people who call up and want to file complaints. The police department aren't enforcing the loitering laws. I have business and property owners at 13th and Gamble, 15th and Ingram talking about the circus on the street corner. Well, you have a constitutional right to hold a sign saying veteran, anything helps. And you can stay there for 10 hours if you want to. You have a constitutional right to roll up in a blanket and sleep next to the street. So I think it's important that we explain to the people in Anchorage why the police department, why Parks and Rec, why we don't do certain things, because we can't. And because people are upset thinking that we're not addressing issues in a way that they can be addressed. But the reality is the police department does what they can do within the law. And I think we need to do a better job of explaining that.
Thank you. Blame it on the Constitution. Dunbar.
We've gone a little far afield from this point, but something that Chris had brought up and the chief, you had mentioned about the officers walking the trails or biking the trails at some point. Are those officers equipped with the paperwork essentially to do this posting? Can they, when they see a camp, can they immediately go there and tack on the 15-day notice, or do they have to call some other kind of specialty unit or special officer to come do that?
All the postings are coordinated with our CAP unit, and because we want to make sure that we're keeping the accurate information on it and so on. However, our patrol officers in the summertime, our SO officers all know to do just that and refer these calls for service to the CAP unit.
What kind of delay would you say that causes? How many, is it hours, days between when the patrol officer sees it and when they can bring in the specialized unit for the posting?
That could vary greatly depending on what hours they're working, days off, and what else is going on in the city where we need their resources for any particular reason.
Mr. Oliva.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Juan Oliva. I've been adjacent property owner to Brother Francis Shelter and other properties that really are the dumping grounds for the rest of the city. I'm offering my property to the city as a campus that they need to expand. And it's not said lightly, because I've toured other homeless facilities, including one of the best is Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada. They actually have a campus, bringing them in, working with them, counseling, etc. And as far as the cost for housing first, we're in a recession. There's a lot of stacked pipeline camps where you can get 2 people in a room, and you could house 400 people, probably for $10,000 to $12,000 total cost by putting a pipeline camp there. My assessment, I appealed it, it dropped $100,000 on appeal due to the stigma of the Brother Francis Shelter and Beans Cafe. I lost $100,000 in value. You do not want to move these facilities anywhere else in the city, because no one wants them, and they come with a lot of baggage. You can have memorandums of understanding, agreement, codes of conduct. None of that holds anything. So the property's for sale. I want out. It's a great location. It'll solve a lot of problems. I'll help anyone who wants to move in, but I'll work with the pipeline surplus to get you that. The second thing I want to mention is the conditional uses. You gave some to the mission, you gave some to the shelter, you gave some to the Beans. You have to revisit those. The negative impact on a community and financing these facilities, they have to come up with a security guard, 24/7. That's a must. You've got to have that independent. You can't ask for volunteers. You can't have unprofessional people. You need a professional security guard. You need a medic. You've got to have a 24-hour medic, not a part-time clinic, but a medic. And then the third thing you have to have is commercial garbage pickup. And that should be required of these facilities. So I hope they do it. They got the money. I saw it given to it last week. I know they can come up with the funds to finance this. The third thing is real important on the 10-day limit. When the ACLU filed that suit, the man claimed it was his home. He claimed his father made him a chess set, 19 years. I didn't get into the case, but I know the value of his home. I'm the auctioneer in the past for the city. And if you appraised everything in the tent as part of his home, I, as a professional appraiser for 38 years, personal property would be less than $25 due to the contamination, due to the wetness, the biological hazards, lice, bed bugs, transmitting MRSA, the worst of them all. The point is, why wait 10 days? Just go in, look at the camp, it looks abandoned, or even if they're in there, take a picture of the stuff. You can throw it in a big bag, and you can just run it by the list of things that are similar, and it wouldn't reach $100. Now, we have that data because President Clinton donated his underwear and got a $7 write-up. These tents have a value. Their possessions, their sleeping bags, etc., they have a value, And I can tell you, if you threw it in a dumpster, you'd be doing them a favor. And it is a biological hazard, even immediately. These aren't REI Eddie Bauer tents. These are tents that are just makeshift. And if Brother Francis Shelter would stop giving them blankets and the veterans would stop giving them tents, hey, that would hold these camps down a little bit. But I'm very, very familiar with the homeless issue. But the sadness is, you're not gonna solve those problems, so we gotta learn to live with them. And I think by containing it down in the area where they all say the services are, I want out. And the worst thing that can happen, I sued the shelter and Beans. We did mediate. You all know I offered the settlement back. There's still issues with that. But anywhere these places go, our esteemed attorney, it's called inverse condemnation. If I file a suit for the value I lost economically, $100,000, plus the safety, economic interference, the health, because it wasn't just shoveling up fecal material, beams, lines, and chlorinates their lot. And my clients have to go by that, and you wouldn't believe what I picked up in the past. But then it's just a matter of quiet enjoyment.
Ron?
And I would say, and I'll sum up, that the inverse condemnation is what the rest of the community is gonna bring on you. And get ready to pay that tax spike. So hey, buy the property, get the security guard, get the medic, get the commercial pickup, and hey, ACLU, it's not worth anything. They didn't lose anything. They want to file a claim. Give them $25, fine them $50, and that homeless person owes the city $25.
Gentleman in the back.
Minister Richard Spike, I tend to go out and I see these same people in ministry. And so I embrace them and I learn their name. But I was going over a fellow named Sanson Barris out of New York, and we know that's Housing First. And it works, and it saves thousands and thousands of dollars. If you just type his name in Google, you'll see, wow, LA did it, New York did it, yes, Washington did it. What's wrong with Anchorage? It will work. We just have to work. We save money. So in a time of economic hardship, I'm a taxpayer. I own several properties, and one of my duplexes is right next to Russ and Jack Park. And so I know the problems, and I've lost a few things to, my tenants have lost a few things to their stealing and their bad habits. And I think I lost a few tenants because of their stealing and their bad habits. But the thing is, they light the fires at night. And that's the key word, they light the fires. When they light the fires, we got a fire hazard. I don't know why we act like we don't know how to use the code enforcement, because there's got to be a law right now. We're in a drought situation. That changes everything, because they all heat by fire. So if we had marked on a website like we've already talked about, and we could kind of shut it down. But if we go with the approach of Housing First saves money, we'll get them into permanent houses, and they're dispersed around the city. And the most phenomenal thing that happens when you treat these unhuman people like human, homeless people become home owners, and they get involved with wanting to go to work and clean up their lives. So I think it's twofold. I've heard both of them be said already, but I think the fire thing is what tricks the timeline. It changes everything. So I'm just hoping, but my thing is, I might sound liberal. We got to save the people. But at the same time, we got to make our properties worth something, and we got to take care of the whole community.
Thanks, sir. And I think you'll be glad to know that Ms. Burke and her efforts, the homeless Housing First, we have been working on and increasing the number of Housing First units throughout Anchorage, and it has been working. So there's a long way to go, but that is the direction the city has taken. On that point, Chief, on the fire point, is that a game changer? If there's somebody reports that they're starting a fire there, does that change our response at all?
I can address that. Acting Lieutenant Mulder and I had a pretty lengthy discussion on this issue, and I came out of one of Ray Jackson's constituent concerns. So there are exceptions, and this is within the four listed exceptions to the ordinance, to the timelines. And one of them says where exigent circumstances posing a serious risk to human life and property exist, the abatement of a campsite may proceed without prior notice. So the problem is, like so many things, it becomes subjective. And the kind of examples that we talked about in our phone conversation, so if you have a super high, well, let's say that there's an active ongoing fire, and the fire department needs to get in there and spray everything down, that's gonna be fine. Now, you step back a little and it's high drought conditions, high fire hazard, there's accelerants maybe in the area if police or somebody go in. My opinion would be they could seize those things that are actually causing danger, but it doesn't allow them to immediately shut down the entire camp. There's also nothing that prevents picking up what is true litter on public land. So that's another aspect, as long as we're on the issue of exceptions. Also, one of the exceptions says when the public land where an illegal campsite is located is clearly posted with no trespassing signage, no camping signage, or is not being open to the public, the abatement of the campsite may proceed without additional notice after the occupants are provided at least 1 hour removed personal property. So again, as we discussed it, most, and Josh might be able to talk about this, but most of the camping, it looks like it occurs in what I would call wildland parks, and they're not posted and they're not signed closing hours. So Town Square, for example, I think it says right on there on both sides, this is closed from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So if somebody sets up camp there in the middle of the night, you can immediately go and do something about it, in my opinion. But a lot of it isn't signed in any way, and so then you're back doing that. So yeah, there is a tool, but it becomes a judgment call as to when hazard reaches that level.
Mr. Steve. What's the railroad do in terms of right-of-way posting or right-of-way enforcement? Is there any?
Yeah, they've got their own cops. If someone's in the right of way, they're trespassing, they have to.
But the right-of-way varies in terms of width and shape and.
200 feet wide from center, 100 feet from center line, either side, almost everywhere except the bootleggers. It's 50 feet from center line.
And just so I understood correctly, Todd, if an area is posted as no trespassing, no camping, something to that nature, that eliminates everything except an hour of clearing your gear out?
According to this, it does. And again, to address, and Parks can talk about this better in terms of, what are the rules about having open fire on public land? But I would assume that you generally can't have that just in the middle of the woods. But what could the municipality do? Essentially, they'd be limited to putting fire out. But that doesn't mean that you can just scoop everything else up in the campsite without going through the notice process, unless there is certain items in there that is no kidding hazard and an immediate danger thing.
Thank you. Mr. Dombrowski?
No, I thought maybe I saw the fire chief come in earlier.
He used to be back there.
I was just gonna say, just thinking about identifying where homeless camps and stuff are, I know AFD does respond to them, but I would think during this climate that we have right now where fire danger is very high, the more PSAs we put out there about call it in if you see it, that will probably lead to a higher response of AFD, and when AFD goes on these calls, I'm sure they communicate with the police department where they are. But you have to remember too, it's not just about fire danger. When AFD is responding to the calls in homeless camps, what they're burning is often carcinogenic. They're often throwing all kinds of things in there, and we actually have had an Anchorage firefighter die because of a response to cancer, from a response to putting out a fire at a homeless camp. So it's not just about a wildfire danger. This also poses a significant health danger to every first responder who's responding, just because of the things that are often burned in those pits. So I would think if the fire department could help push out more PSAs, whether it's through the media or through Nixle or whatever, on just to everyday citizens about especially fires. If you see them, that's another avenue for APD to identify where these camps are, I would think.
Any other comments from our guests? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Corinne O'Neill. I work at Rural Cap. And we often do homeless outreach services and work with many of the people that CAP team sees that are camping. And I think from our perspective, there are many people in that 75 group that would take a certain percentage of services, particularly a housing service, but have some sort of barrier that's keeping a service provider from serving them. We often have a whole host of state and federal criteria that people have to meet. And so they're screened out on a variety of bases, whether they have a developmental disability versus a mental illness versus a criminal background that doesn't qualify them for a federal housing subsidy, to refugee status that doesn't allow them to come into federal housing. And so I think from a service provider perspective, we could take and work with many of these people if we had a more flexible housing pool that often comes with particularly federal funding, which is most of our housing resource in this community.
Any other comments, questions? Joe? All right, don't see any further, so unless there's any wrap up from our participants. We've had the summit on homeless camps, so I'm sure now they'll be gone. Done what the assembly could do and take care of the situation. There were a lot of good ideas. It sounds like a lot of efforts are being made. Some we didn't know about, some we did know about. But the key thing is going to be staying on top of this issue at all levels of the administration, assembly, and all the departments to make some headway into it, and hopefully we will do that. So thank you all for coming. Appreciate your participation. We are adjourned.